They say a woman's reputation is worth more than gold in the Arizona Territory, but what happens when both are stolen in the same breath? On a scorching afternoon in 1882, Lydia Hale learned that survival isn't about what you lose, it's about who's watching when you fall. One man destroyed her name with a lie. Another saw through it with a single glance. This is the story of a spare room, a second chance, and two broken hearts that built something unbreakable. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to that dusty street where everything changed. The sun hung over Copper Springs like a punishment, beating down on the rutted main street with the kind of heat that made even the dogs seek shade. It was the third week of August, and the Arizona desert showed no mercy. Dust devils spun lazy spirals at the edge of town, and the wooden sidewalks radiated warmth through boot leather. Most sensible folks had retreated indoors during the worst of the afternoon heat, leaving the street nearly empty except for a few horses tied to hitching posts, their heads drooping in the oppressive stillness, which meant that everyone inside the surrounding buildings had a perfect view when Martha Pritchard threw open the doors of her boarding house and sent Lydia Hale stumbling onto the porch. "Out! Get out of my establishment, you thieving wretch!" Lydia caught herself against the railing, her worn carpet bag landing in the dust at the bottom of the steps. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling across her face, and her calico dress, the nicer of the two she owned, was wrinkled from being shoved. She was 26 years old, and in that moment she felt every hard year of her life pressing down on her shoulders. "Mrs. Pritchard, please," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Don't you please me?" Martha was a formidable woman, built like a rain barrel and twice as sturdy, with iron gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her expression carved from granite. "I won't have a thief under my roof, Mr. Thornton's pocket watch gone missing, and you the only one who cleans his room. The evidence speaks for itself. I never touched his watch." Lydia lifted her chin, meeting the older woman's eyes directly. "I've never stolen anything in my life." "That's what they all say." Martha sniffed, her mouth puckering like she'd bitten into something sour. "Mr. Thornton is a respected businessman in this town. You're just a—" She paused, letting the silence fill with implication. "A woman with no people, no references, and now no employment. Who do you think folks will believe?" Behind Martha's substantial form, other faces appeared in the boarding house windows. Mrs. Chen, the laundress, the Pritchard daughters, their eyes wide with excitement at the scandal. Even Mr. Jameson, the clerk who'd always been kind enough to tip his hat to Lydia, though he quickly looked away when she met his gaze. "My things," Lydia started, "are right there in that bag. Everything you came with. I'll not be accused of keeping what's yours, though it's more charity than you deserve." Martha stepped back into the doorway. "You'll find no welcome in this town, Miss Hale. A woman who steals from her betters has no place in decent society." The door slammed with a finality that echoed down the empty street. Lydia stood on the porch for a moment, her heart pounding against her ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage. She could feel the eyes on her, from the boarding house, from the general store across the way, from the telegraph office and the bank. The weight of their judgment was almost physical, pressing against her skin. She descended the steps carefully, as if moving through water, and bent to retrieve her carpet bag. It wasn't heavy. Everything she owned in the world, 2 dresses, a spare set of undergarments, a hairbrush, a small tin of her mother's letters, and the cameo brooch that was the last remnant of better days, fit into one small bag. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being accused of theft when she owned so little that stealing would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. Lydia began walking, her spine straight and her head up, though everything in her wanted to crumble. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. The street stretched before her like a gauntlet, each step deliberate and measured. She didn't look at the faces in the windows. She didn't acknowledge the whispers that followed in her wake, like the dust stirred by her skirts. She had no plan, no destination. The boarding house had been her home for 8 months, ever since she'd arrived in Copper Springs from Denver, running from a different kind of trouble. She had $14.60 to her name, saved from her wages. The next town was 30 miles east, and the stage fare was more than she had. The general store's shadow fell across her path, offering a moment's relief from the brutal sun. Lydia paused there, pressing her back against the wall, her bag clutched to her chest. She closed her eyes and allowed herself one moment, just one, of pure despair. She knew exactly what had happened, of course. She wasn't naive. Howard Thornton had arrived in Copper Springs 2 months ago, a prosperous merchant from San Francisco looking to expand his import business into the territories. He'd taken the best room at the boarding house, the one with the view of the mountains and the private washstand. He wore expensive suits and had soft hands that had never done real work. And he'd taken an immediate interest in Lydia. At first, she'd thought it was just the usual attention men sometimes paid her. Her mother had been beautiful, and Lydia had inherited her dark eyes and delicate features, though life had hardened them some. She'd deflected his compliments politely, maintained proper distance, done nothing to encourage him. But Howard Thornton wasn't a man accustomed to being refused. The advances had grown more persistent, a hand on her arm that lingered too long, invitations to dinner that she declined, questions about her circumstances that probed too deeply. And then 3 days ago, he'd cornered her in the upstairs hallway when she was changing the linens in the rooms. "A woman in your position could benefit from a generous patron," he'd said, standing too close, blocking her path. His breath had smelled of cigars and whiskey, even though it was only mid-morning. "I could set you up in a little house, nice dresses, security. All you'd have to do is be appreciative." Lydia had looked him straight in the eye. "I'd rather starve, Mr. Thornton." His expression had changed then, the veneer of genteel charm falling away to reveal something cold and mean underneath. "You'll regret that." She'd pushed past him, her skin crawling where his hand had brushed her waist, and she'd avoided him ever since. But she should have known, should have anticipated, that a man like that wouldn't simply accept rejection. Men with money and influence rarely did. The pocket watch was just the weapon. The accusation was the revenge. And now she was here, homeless and ruined, while Howard Thornton no doubt sat in his comfortable room, satisfied that he'd taught her the price of refusing him. Lydia opened her eyes and straightened. The despair was still there, a tight knot in her chest, but she pushed it down. She'd survived worse. She'd survived her father's death when she was 12. She'd survived her mother's slow decline into illness and poverty. She'd survived the cholera outbreak in Denver that had taken her closest friend. She'd survived the journey west with barely enough money for food. She would survive this too. Somehow. The street remained largely empty, the heat keeping most people indoors. Lydia began walking again, heading toward the edge of town without any clear purpose except to escape the eyes and whispers. Maybe she could find work at one of the outlying ranches. Maybe someone needed a cook or a seamstress, or someone to help with washing. Maybe, "Ma'am?" The voice was deep and quiet, coming from her left. Lydia's steps faltered, and she turned to find a man standing in the shade of the livery stable. One shoulder leaned against the rough wood of the building. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a rancher's build, all lean muscle and weathered strength. His hat was pushed back slightly, revealing dark hair threaded with gray at the temples, and his face was all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin. He wore simple work clothes, denim pants, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, dust on his boots, and he studied her with eyes the color of storm clouds. Lydia's first instinct was wariness. Strange men in frontier towns didn't speak to unaccompanied women without reason, and those reasons were rarely good. She tightened her grip on her carpetbag. "Sir?" Her tone was cool, discouraging. He pushed away from the wall, moving with an unhurried grace that suggested a man comfortable in his own skin. As he stepped into the light, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 40, maybe a few years older, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into sun and distance. There was something about his face, a quietness, a gravity, that made her pause rather than immediately walk away. "I couldn't help but notice your situation." He nodded toward the boarding house behind her. Heat flooded Lydia's cheeks, shame and anger mixing in equal measure. "I'm sure the whole town noticed. That was rather the point." Wasn't asking about the town's opinion. His voice remained level, unbothered. "Asking about yours." The unexpected response caught her off guard. She studied him more carefully, looking for the signs she'd learned to recognize: the predatory gleam, the assumption of superiority, the expectation of gratitude. But his expression was unreadable. His posture relaxed but respectful, maintaining a proper distance. "My opinion," she said carefully, "is that I need to find somewhere else to be." He nodded slowly as if this was a reasonable assessment. "You got people in town?" "No." "Plans?" "Working on it." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close to acknowledgement. That's a diplomatic way of saying no. Despite everything, Lydia felt a spark of irritation. "Are you enjoying this? Watching someone else's misfortune?" "No, ma'am." The directness of his answer and the lack of defensiveness in it took the wind from her anger. "I'm deciding whether to make an offer or mind my own business." "I don't need charity." "Didn't offer any." He adjusted his hat, his movements deliberate. "Got a ranch about 8 miles north of here. Run it alone since my wife passed 2 years back. There's a spare room in the house, used to be for hired hands before I had to let them go. Room's yours if you want it. In exchange, you help with cooking, mending, basic household tasks. Honest work for honest accommodation." Lydia stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A stranger, a man, was offering her shelter? Every instinct screamed danger. Women didn't go to isolated ranches with men they didn't know. That was how they ended up ruined, or worse, or simply disappeared into the vastness of the territory with no one to notice or care. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Ethan Cole." He didn't offer his hand, seeming to understand that she wouldn't take it. "Own the Triple Creek Ranch. You can ask anyone in town about me. I'm no angel, but I'm no devil either. Had the same ranch for 15 years, been in this territory my whole life. There's a lock on the spare room door. You'd have privacy. I'm not asking for anything improper, and I'm not offering anything but what I said. Work in exchange for a roof." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "You don't know me. You don't know if I'm actually a thief or not." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "I know what I saw. Saw you walk out of that boarding house with your head up even though you were humiliated. Saw you keep your dignity when it would have been easier to cry or rage. That tells me more about your character than any accusation from a man in a fancy suit. You saw what happened. Was across the street at the smithy, heard the whole thing." He paused. "Also heard Thornton bragging at the saloon last week about how he was going to teach some uppity woman her place. Didn't take much to figure out who he meant when I saw you thrown out today." The validation, the simple acknowledgement that she'd been wronged, hit Lydia with unexpected force. Her throat tightened and she had to blink rapidly to keep tears from forming. She'd expected to carry this alone, to have everyone believe the lie simply because Howard Thornton had money and influence. "I never touched his watch," she whispered. "Didn't think you did." Ethan's tone remained matter-of-fact, as if her innocence was obvious and unremarkable. "Man like that doesn't care about a watch. Cares about power, about making sure a woman who said no pays for it." They stood in silence for a moment, the heat pressing down around them. From somewhere down the street came the sound of a piano being tuned, the discordant notes drifting through the still air. A wagon rattled past, the driver carefully not looking in their direction. Lydia's mind raced through her options. She could refuse Ethan Cole's offer, could try to make it on her own, could use her meager savings to what? Sleep under the stars until the money ran out? Try to find work in a town where everyone now believed she was a thief? Walk 30 miles to the next settlement with no guarantee of anything better? Or she could accept help from a stranger who might be exactly what he claimed, a widower who needed help and was offering fair exchange, or might be something far more dangerous. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked quietly. Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful. "You don't. Same way I don't know if you'll rob me blind or burn down my house. Trust isn't something you know, it's something you build or you don't. I can tell you I'll keep my word, can tell you I'll respect your space and person, but words are easy. Actions are what matter." "That's not particularly reassuring." "No," he agreed. "I suppose it's not. But it's honest, which counts for something." He straightened, preparing to leave. "Offer stands if you want it. I'll be at the livery for another hour. getting my horse shod. After that, I'm heading home. You decide you want to take the chance, you're welcome to ride out with me. You decide you don't, I'll respect that too and wish you well." He turned to go, then paused. "One more thing. The work's real. I'm not looking for easy labor or someone to take advantage of. Ranch is struggling some since I lost my hands. Can't afford to pay wages right now, which is why I'm making the offer I am. You'll earn your keep, and it won't always be pleasant, but you'll be safe, and you'll be treated with respect. That's my word for what it's worth to you." With that, he walked away, his long stride carrying him back toward the livery stable. Lydia watched him go, her mind a whirl of confusion and calculation and desperate hope that she didn't want to acknowledge. She looked down at her carpet bag, at the boarding house behind her, at the town that had already judged and condemned her. She thought about Howard Thornton's satisfied smirk, about Martha Pritchard's righteous anger, about all the people who'd watched her fall and done nothing. Then she thought about Ethan Cole's steady gray eyes, about the way he'd spoken to her like she was a person worthy of respect rather than an object of pity or scorn, about the fact that he'd asked nothing of her except honest work, had offered her agency even in his proposal. It was foolish. It was dangerous. It was possibly the worst decision she could make. But then again, staying in Copper Springs was impossible, and she had nowhere else to go. Lydia took a deep breath, adjusted her grip on her bag, and began walking toward the livery stable. The interior of the stable was blessedly cool after the harsh sunlight, smelling of hay and horse and leather. Her eyes took a moment to adjust to the dimness. She could hear voices from the back. Ethan Cole speaking in low tones to someone, probably the blacksmith. She waited, her resolve wavering with each passing second. This was insane. She should leave. She should find another way. But there was no other way. Footsteps approached, and Ethan emerged from the shadows leading a large bay horse, freshly shod. He saw her standing there and stopped, his expression carefully neutral. "Made a decision?" he asked. Lydia nodded, not trusting her voice. "And?" She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'll take your offer, Mr. Cole. With conditions." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "I'd expect nothing less." "What conditions?" "The lock on the door you mentioned. It works?" "It works." "And you give me your word that you'll respect my privacy and person? That this is truly just an arrangement for labor in exchange for accommodation?" "You have my word. If I find the situation unsuitable, I'm free to leave at any time?" "Any time. I'll even drive you back to town myself if you want." Lydia studied him, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of the cruel amusement Howard Thornton had shown. But Ethan Cole's face remained open, patient, waiting for her decision without pressure or manipulation. "All right," she said quietly. "Then I accept." He nodded once, as if they'd just concluded a business transaction, which she supposed they had. "I've got a wagon around the side. We can load your bag and head out. It's about a 2-hour drive to the ranch." As they walked out of the stable, Lydia caught sight of faces in windows again, watching. She wondered what new rumors would spread now, the disgraced thief leaving town with the reclusive widower. Let them talk. Their opinions had already destroyed her reputation. There was nothing left for them to take. The wagon was simple but sturdy, with a bench seat and a bed for supplies. Ethan helped her up, his hand brief and impersonal on her elbow, then climbed up beside her. He kept a respectful distance between them on the seat, she noticed. The reins were well worn but cared for, and the horse that pulled the wagon looked healthy and strong. As they started moving, leaving Copper Springs behind, Lydia allowed herself one look back. The town shimmered in the heat, already feeling like something from another life. She'd arrived here 8 months ago, hoping for a fresh start, for a place to finally feel safe and build something stable. Instead, she'd learned the same lesson she'd learned everywhere else. The world wasn't safe for women alone. Protection was an illusion. Reputation could be destroyed in a moment by a man's wounded pride. She turned forward, watching the road ahead as it stretched into the desert landscape. Beside her, Ethan Cole drove in comfortable silence, not trying to fill the space with empty conversation or false reassurance. "You'll want to cover your head," he said after a while, nodding toward the sun. "It's fierce this time of day." Lydia hadn't brought a bonnet, It had seemed like an unnecessary luxury when she'd packed her bag that morning before the world had fallen apart. Ethan reached behind the seat and pulled out a wide-brimmed hat, clearly his own, and offered it to her. "It'll be too big, but it'll keep the sun off." She took it hesitantly, the gesture striking her as oddly thoughtful. The hat smelled like sage and leather and sweat. Not unpleasant, just intensely masculine. She settled it on her head, and he was right. It was far too large, but it did block the brutal sunlight. They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds the creak of the wagon, the rhythmic clip of hooves, and the whisper of wind across the open land. The terrain was harsh but beautiful in its own way. Red rocks and scattered juniper, distant mountains painted purple by the afternoon light, vast stretches of earth that seemed to go on forever. "You're from back east originally?" Ethan asked eventually, his tone conversational but not intrusive. "Denver," Lydia replied. "Came out here 8 months ago." He nodded, didn't press for details. She appreciated that. After a moment, she found herself volunteering more. "My mother passed. There was nothing left for me there, and I'd heard there were opportunities in the territories. I was wrong about that, apparently." "Copper Springs isn't the whole territory," Ethan said. "It's just one small town with the same small mines as everywhere else." "You don't have a high opinion of your neighbors." "I have an accurate opinion of human nature." He glanced at her briefly. "Most people are decent enough when it doesn't cost them anything. But put pressure on them, make them choose between what's right and what's convenient or profitable. And you see who they really are." There was a bitterness in his voice that suggested personal experience. Lydia wondered what had happened to make him so cynical, wondered about the wife he'd mentioned, about why he was running a ranch alone when most men his age would have sons or hired hands to help. But she didn't ask. If he wanted to share, he would. And if he didn't, well, she had enough secrets of her own to respect his privacy. The land began to change gradually as they traveled north. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills, and more vegetation appeared. Cottonwoods near a creek bed, better grass, signs that water was more plentiful here. Lydia could see cattle in the distance, grazing in the late afternoon light. "Triple Creek," Ethan said, following her gaze. "Named for the 3 streams that run through the property. It's good land, or it was before the drought. Been a hard few years." The ranch house appeared as they crested a rise, and Lydia felt her breath catch slightly. It wasn't grand, not like the painted houses she'd seen in Denver or the elaborate homes of wealthy ranchers, but it was solid and well-built, a 2-story structure made of wood and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. There were outbuildings nearby, a barn, a stable, what looked like a bunkhouse, and several storage sheds. Evidence of neglect was visible even from a distance. The porch railing sagged in one section. Weeds had overtaken what might have once been a garden. One of the shutters hung crooked, but the bones of the place were good, and Lydia could see what it had been, what it could be again with care and attention. "It's not much," Ethan said, and she heard something defensive in his tone, as if he was seeing it through her eyes and finding it wanting. "It's more than I had an hour ago," Lydia replied honestly. He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. "I'll show you around, get you settled in. Supper won't be fancy. I usually just make something simple." "I can cook," Lydia said, climbing down from the wagon before he could help her. "That was part of my duties at the boarding house. Tomorrow's soon enough to start earning your keep. Today you just need to get your bearings." He grabbed her carpet bag and led her up the porch steps, which creaked but held firm. The front door was unlocked. Lydia noticed there wasn't even a key, which spoke to how isolated the ranch was. Inside, the house was dim and surprisingly cool, the thick walls keeping out the worst of the heat. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a scarred wooden table with mismatched chairs, open shelves holding dishes and supplies, and a cast-iron stove that looked well used. Everything was clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. There were no curtains on the windows, no decorations on the walls, nothing soft or personal to indicate that this was a home rather than just a place to eat and sleep. "Your room's upstairs," Ethan said, heading for a narrow staircase. "There's 3 bedrooms up there. Mine, the spare where you'll stay, and what used to be—" He trailed off, then continued. "Another spare room, washrooms at the end of the hall." The upstairs hallway was dim, lit only by the last of the afternoon sun filtering through a window at the far end. Ethan opened a door on the left, revealing a small but adequate room. There was a bed with a simple frame, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a chair by the window. The window itself looked out over the ranch land, offering a view of the distant mountains. "Linens are clean," Ethan said, setting her bag on the chair. "There's more blankets in the dresser if you need them. Nights get cold even in summer. The lock." He demonstrated, showing her a simple but sturdy lock on the inside of the door and producing a key from his pocket. "This is yours. There's no duplicate. Only you can lock or unlock this door." He handed her the key, and their fingers brushed briefly. Lydia pulled back quickly, tucking the key into her pocket. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, already moving toward the door. "I'll leave you to get settled. Come down when you're ready, or don't. No pressure." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Lydia stood in the center of the small room and let herself truly feel everything she'd been holding back. The fear, the humiliation, the desperate relief of having a place to be, even if that place was a stranger's isolated ranch. She moved to the window and looked out at the vast expanse of land bathed in the golden light of approaching sunset. Somewhere out there was Copper Springs, was Howard Thornton, was the life she'd been building that had crumbled in the space of an afternoon. But here, in this small room with its lock and key, was possibility. Dangerous possibility, perhaps. Uncertain possibility. But possibility nonetheless. Lydia unpacked her few belongings, hanging her spare dress in the wardrobe, arranging her hairbrush and her mother's letters on the dresser. The cameo brooch she pinned to her collar. It had been her mother's, and before that her grandmother's, one of the few beautiful things that had survived the long decline from gentility to poverty. Wearing it made her feel less alone. When there was nothing left to unpack, she locked the door from the inside and lay down on the bed, just for a moment. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, the pillow soft. Through the window she could hear the sounds of the ranch, distant cattle, the wind in the cottonwoods, the creak of the windmill pumping water. For the first time in hours, Lydia allowed herself to close her eyes without fear. Downstairs, Ethan Cole stood at his kitchen window, looking out at the land he'd built his life on, and wondered if he'd just made the best or worst decision of his life. He hadn't been lying when he told Lydia Hale that he'd witnessed her humiliation. He'd been getting his horse shod, as he did every few months, when he'd heard Martha Pritchard's voice raised in righteous fury. Like everyone else, he'd looked out to see what the commotion was, and he'd seen a young woman being cast out like refuse. What had made him step forward, though? What had made him speak to her when every instinct of self-preservation told him to mind his own business? Was the way she'd held herself, that straight spine, that lifted chin, that refusal to let them see her break. It had reminded him of someone. Ethan turned from the window and busied himself with preparing a simple meal. Beans, cornbread, some of the salt pork he kept in the cold cellar. Mechanical tasks that kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering down paths he'd blocked off 2 years ago. But as he worked, he couldn't help wondering if he'd invited trouble into his carefully constructed solitude. A woman in the house again. Voices in the empty spaces. The presence of someone other than himself in these rooms that had grown so familiar in their silence. He'd meant what he said about needing help. The ranch was suffering from his inability to manage both the land and the house alone. He'd let hired hands go last year when the drought had killed too many cattle and money got tight. He'd thought he could handle it all himself, but the truth was slowly drowning him in neglect and exhaustion. But was that really why he'd offered Lydia Hale shelter? Or was there something else, some need he didn't want to acknowledge for the sound of another human voice, for evidence that life continued even after loss? Ethan shook his head, dismissing the thought. It didn't matter. The offer was made, accepted. Now they'd both have to live with the consequences, whatever those turned out to be. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Light, hesitant. Lydia appeared in the doorway, her hair now properly pinned, her face composed. She'd removed his hat and left it upstairs, and without it she looked younger, more vulnerable, though she was clearly trying to hide it. "Smells good," she said quietly. "It's just beans." Ethan gestured to the table. "You're welcome to join me, or I can fix you a plate to take upstairs if you'd prefer." Lydia hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Propriety said she should eat alone, maintain distance, protect herself. But practicality said that if they were going to live under the same roof, some level of interaction was inevitable. "I'll eat here, if that's all right," she decided. They sat across from each other at the scarred wooden table, and Ethan dished out the simple meal. For a while they ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the settling sounds of the house as it cooled in the evening air. "It's good," Lydia said finally. "The cornbread especially. My wife's recipe." The words came out before Ethan could stop them, and he immediately regretted them. He didn't talk about Sarah, hadn't said her name aloud in months, but Lydia just nodded, not pressing. She must have been a good cook. She was good at a lot of things. Ethan found himself continuing despite his intentions. She grew up on a ranch, knew the work, knew what she was getting into when she married me. Made this place a home instead of just a house. "How long were you married?" 12 years. He stared down at his bowl. "She died in childbirth 2 years ago. The baby didn't make it either." The stark words hung in the air between them. Lydia's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I can't imagine." "No." Ethan met her eyes. "I don't suppose you can. Same way I can't imagine what you've been through. We all carry our own burdens." They finished the meal in a more comfortable silence, one built on mutual respect for pain and privacy. When they were done, Lydia began clearing the plates without being asked, moving to the basin to wash them. "You don't have to," Ethan started. "I know, but you cooked, so I'll clean. That seems fair." He watched her work for a moment, efficient, practiced movements that spoke of long experience with household tasks. Then he moved to help her, drying the dishes she washed and putting them away. Working side by side in the quiet kitchen, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. A sense of rightness, as if a piece that had been missing had clicked back into place. It unsettled him, that feeling. He'd gotten used to being alone, to the silence, to needing no one. But maybe, he thought as he watched Lydia carefully dry her hands on a towel, maybe he'd been lying to himself about that. "Sun's almost down," he said, moving to light the lamps. "Days start early on a ranch, first light usually, but tomorrow you can sleep in, get your bearings. No rush." "I'd rather start as I mean to continue," Lydia replied. "First light is fine." Ethan nodded his approval. "Then I'll say good night. If you need anything, my room's across the hall from yours. Just knock." "I'll be fine." She paused at the foot of the stairs. "Mr. Cole, thank you for today, for all of this." "It's just a fair arrangement," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Nothing to thank me for." But as she climbed the stairs and he heard the soft click of her door lock engaging, Ethan knew that wasn't entirely true. It wasn't just a fair arrangement. It was a second chance, for both of them, at something neither had dared to hope for. Whether that something was simply survival or something more, only time would tell. The first morning came earlier than Lydia expected. She woke to the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere in the distance, the sky outside her window still more gray than blue. For a moment she forgot where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the different quality of light, the absence of Mrs. Pritchard's boarding house sounds. Then memory returned in a rush. The accusation, the humiliation, Ethan Cole's unexpected offer. She dressed quickly in the dim pre-dawn light, braiding her hair and pinning it up securely. Her reflection in the dresser mirror showed a woman who looked tired but determined, and that would have to be enough. Downstairs, she could already hear movement, the clank of the stove being stoked, the scrape of a chair. When she entered the kitchen, Ethan was already dressed in his work clothes, his hair damp as if he'd splashed water on his face. He looked up from the coffee pot he was filling, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or approval. "Didn't think you'd actually be up," he said. "I said I would be." Lydia moved to the stove, assessing what was available. "What do you usually eat for breakfast?" "Whatever's quick. Coffee, maybe some bread if there is any." "That's not enough for a man doing ranch work." She opened the cold cellar door, peering inside. There were eggs, some bacon, potatoes from last year's harvest starting to sprout. "Sit down. I'll make something proper." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he poured 2 cups of coffee and sat at the table, watching her move around his kitchen with the ease of someone who'd spent years preparing meals in unfamiliar spaces. Lydia worked efficiently, frying bacon in the cast-iron skillet, scrambling eggs with a bit of milk, slicing and frying potatoes until they were golden and crisp. The smell of cooking food filled the kitchen, and she saw Ethan's expression change, something almost like pain crossing his features before he looked away. "Your wife used to make breakfast," Lydia said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Every morning." His voice was rough. "Haven't had a real breakfast since... in a long time." Lydia set a full plate in front of him, then fixed one for herself and sat down across the table. They ate in silence for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, painting the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold. "This is good," Ethan said finally. "Thank you. It's just eggs and bacon." "It's more than that." He met her eyes. "It's the first time this house has felt like... well, it's good." After breakfast, Ethan showed her around the ranch properly. In the growing daylight, Lydia could see the full scope of both the property and its neglect. The barn needed repairs, several fence lines were down, and the vegetable garden that Sarah Cole had apparently once tended was now completely overrun with weeds. "I know it's a lot," Ethan said, following her gaze. "I've been trying to keep up with the essential work, the cattle, the water systems, the major repairs, but everything else has just fallen by the wayside," Lydia finished. "I understand. You can't do everything alone." "No," he agreed. "I'm learning that." They worked out a division of labor as they walked. Ethan would handle the cattle, the heavy repair work, and managing the land. Lydia would take charge of the house, the cooking, the garden if she could salvage it, and the mending. She'd noticed his shirts had missing buttons and frayed cuffs. It was a practical arrangement, each playing to their strengths. "The chickens," Ethan said, gesturing to a coop near the barn. "They're half wild now. Haven't been properly tended in months. If you can get them laying regularly again, we could sell eggs in town for extra income." "I can do that." Lydia studied the ramshackle coop. "But they'll need a proper henhouse. That structure won't survive the next strong wind." "Add it to the list." Ethan's tone was dry but not dismissive. "Everything needs fixing or replacing. Pick your battles." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Lydia woke before dawn to make breakfast, then tackled the house while Ethan worked the land. The first day, she scrubbed the kitchen from top to bottom, washing dishes that hadn't been properly cleaned in who knew how long, scouring the stove, sweeping and mopping the floors. The second day, she moved to the living area, beating dust from the furniture, washing windows, bringing order to chaos. Ethan came in for lunch on the third day to find her standing on a chair, scrubbing the high shelves. "You don't have to do all this," he said, watching her work. "Yes, I do." Lydia didn't stop scrubbing. "I can't live in filth, and neither should you. Besides, we agreed. I work for my keep. This is work." Sarah used to say the same thing. The words slipped out, and Ethan looked surprised at himself. Said a clean house was a sign of respect for yourself and anyone who lived there with you. Lydia climbed down from the chair, wiping her hands on her apron. She was right. A house should be a sanctuary, not just a place to collapse at the end of the day. Something in Ethan's expression shifted, became more open. "Would you like to see your garden? What's left of it?" They walked out together into the afternoon heat. The garden plot was larger than Lydia had initially realized, probably a quarter-acre, surrounded by a fence that was mostly intact. Inside, weeds rioted among the remnants of what had once been carefully tended rows. "She grew everything," Ethan said, his voice distant with memory. "Vegetables, herbs, even flowers. Said that beauty was as necessary as food. I thought she was being fanciful, but she was right. Coming home to see her working here, surrounded by growing things, it made the hard days easier." Lydia knelt and pulled up a handful of weeds, revealing the dried stalks of what had been tomato plants. Some of the perennials might still be viable. The asparagus bed, if she had one, maybe some of the herbs. And it's not too late to plant a fall garden, lettuce, radishes, carrots, greens. "You know gardening?" "My mother gardened. We had a small plot behind our house in Denver. It was one of the things that kept us fed when money was tight. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. If you can spare the water, I can bring this back. Water we have, thanks to the 3 creeks. Take what you need. Over the following week, Lydia worked the garden in the early mornings and late afternoons when the sun was less brutal. She cleared weeds, turned soil, discovered that Sarah Cole's asparagus bed was indeed still alive, just dormant. She found a cache of saved seeds in the barn: beans, squash, lettuce, carrots, all carefully labeled in neat handwriting that made Lydia's throat tight. These were Sarah's seeds, Sarah's careful preparations for a future she'd never see. "Should I plant them?" she asked Ethan one evening at dinner. "Or would you rather I didn't?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the small packets she'd laid on the table. Then he picked up the beans, turning the packet over in his weathered hands. "She saved these for growing, not for keeping as relics," he said finally. "Plant them. She'd want the garden to live, even if she couldn't." Lydia planted the seeds the next day, her hands gentle with the precious cargo. As she worked, she found herself talking to the absent Sarah, telling her about the weather, about how Ethan was doing, about the house and the plans Lydia had for fall preserving if the garden produced. It should have felt foolish, talking to a dead woman, but somehow it didn't. It felt like a kind of bridge, a way of honoring what had been while building toward what might be. The house began to transform under Lydia's care. She found curtains in a trunk upstairs, simple muslin panels that Sarah had made, and washed and hung them, softening the stark windows. She discovered that the sagging porch railing just needed the screws tightened, and she fixed it herself using tools from the barn. She organized the pantry, taking inventory of supplies, making lists of what they needed. "You're running this place like a military campaign," Ethan observed one evening, seeing her carefully written lists. "Someone has to." Lydia made another notation. "We're low on flour, completely out of sugar, and the salt pork won't last another month. I can make soap from the fat drippings, but we'll need lye. And those chickens need calcium, crushed oyster shells if we can get them, or I'll have to bake and crush eggshells." Ethan leaned back in his chair, something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "You've given this a lot of thought." "I've run a household before. It's just logistics and planning." She tapped the list with her pencil. "But it requires resources. I know money is tight, but these are necessities, not luxuries. Make a list of everything we need for the next month. I'll take you into town on Saturday. We can stock up, and you can show your face. Let people see you're doing fine." Lydia's hand stilled on the paper. She hadn't been back to Copper Springs since the day of her disgrace. The thought of returning, of facing those judgmental stares and whispered comments, made her stomach clench. "I don't need to go into town," she said carefully. "You can do the shopping." "Could," Ethan agreed. "But I won't. You didn't do anything wrong, Lydia. Walking around like you're ashamed just confirms their lies. You go in with your head up, same as you walked out of that boarding house. Show them you're not broken." "I'm not sure I'm that brave." "Yes, you are." His tone was matter-of-fact. "You get up every morning and work until you're exhausted. You've turned this house around in 2 weeks. You face a stranger's isolated ranch without knowing if you'd be safe. That's brave. Going into town is just showing up." Saturday came too quickly. Lydia dressed in her better dress, pinned her mother's cameo at her throat like armor, and climbed into the wagon beside Ethan. Her hands were clenched tight in her lap, her spine rigid with tension. "Breathe," Ethan said quietly as they approached the town. "Remember, you've done nothing wrong. That's the truth. And truth doesn't change just because small people tell lies." The streets of Copper Springs were busy with Saturday shoppers. Lydia felt the stares as soon as they arrived, heard the whispers start like wind through grass. Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her elbow, and they walked into the general store together. The conversation inside died the moment they entered. Mr. Hartley, the store owner, looked up from his ledger, his expression conflicted. Behind the counter, his wife's face hardened with disapproval. "Ethan," Mr. Hartley said cautiously, "didn't expect to see you today. Need supplies." Ethan handed over Lydia's carefully prepared list. "Everything on there, plus 20 pounds of flour and 10 of sugar." Mrs. Hartley's gaze fixed on Lydia with unconcealed hostility. "I'm surprised you'd bring her here, Ethan, after what she did." "After what was done to her, you mean?" Ethan's voice was calm but firm. Miss Hale was falsely accused by a man seeking revenge. I was there. I know what happened. You can't possibly believe, Mrs. Hartley started. I know what I saw and heard. Howard Thornton is a vindictive coward who couldn't handle being refused. He manufactured an accusation to destroy an innocent woman's reputation. Ethan met the woman's eyes steadily. And this town was all too ready to believe him because it was easier than standing up for what's right. The silence in the store was profound. Lydia stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe. No one had defended her, not since this nightmare began. And here was Ethan Cole, practically a stranger, speaking truth to a room full of people who wanted to believe the lie. Mr. Hartley cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, that is, we don't know all the circumstances. No, Ethan interrupted. You don't, but you were willing to condemn anyway. Now, are you going to fill this order, or do I need to take my business to the next town? No, of course I'll fill it. Mr. Hartley took the list with shaking hands. Give me a few minutes. While they waited, Lydia became aware of other people entering the store. Mrs. Chen, the laundress from the boarding house, and behind her, surprisingly, Mr. Jameson, the clerk who'd looked away during her humiliation. Mrs. Chen approached hesitantly. Miss Hale, she said quietly, I want you to know, I never believed it. You were always honest, always kind. What Martha did to you was wrong. Then why didn't you say something? The words came out sharper than Lydia intended, but she couldn't help it. Why did you just stand there? Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm a Chinese woman in a white town, and I have children to feed. Speaking up would have cost me everything. I'm not proud of my silence, but I'm not strong like you. The honest answer deflated Lydia's anger. She understood survival, understood the impossible choices women had to make in a world that gave them so little power. I understand, she said finally. Thank you for saying something now. Mr. Jameson stepped forward next, hat in hand. Miss Hale, I owe you an apology. I knew Howard Thornton was lying. I'd heard him at the saloon too, making threats. But I said nothing because I'm a coward, I suppose. I'm sorry for that. Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Lydia's voice was stiff but not unkind. By the time their supplies were packed and loaded, a small crowd had gathered outside the store. Some faces were still hostile, but others had shifted, doubt creeping in where certainty had been, shame replacing self-righteousness. Martha Pritchard stood across the street, her arms crossed, her expression sour. Lydia met her gaze directly, refusing to look away, and eventually it was Martha who turned aside, disappearing into her boarding house. On the ride home, Lydia felt something loosening in her chest. Not quite relief, but perhaps the beginning of it. You didn't have to do that, she said to Ethan. Defend me like that. It could damage your reputation too. My reputation can handle it, and someone needed to tell the truth. He glanced at her. Besides, I meant what I said. What happened to you was wrong. I won't pretend otherwise just to keep the peace. Why? The question burst out of her. Why do you care? You barely know me. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically beneath them. When Sarah died, he said finally, this whole town came to pay respects, brought food, offered help, said all the right things, but within a month they'd all gone back to their lives. I was drowning in grief and work, and no one noticed or cared because I was just expected to handle it alone. That's when I learned that most people's kindness is shallow. It only extends as far as convention requires. He adjusted the reins, his jaw tight. So when I see someone being destroyed by gossip and lies, someone who's alone like I was, I remember what it felt like. And I can either be like everyone else and look away, or I can do what I wish someone had done for me. It's that simple. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away furiously. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me for basic decency. But his voice was gentler now. Just keep your head up and keep going. That's all any of us can do. The weeks continued to pass, each one settling them deeper into their shared routine. Lydia's garden began to flourish under her care, green shoots pushing up through the dark soil. The chickens, properly fed and tended, started laying regularly again. She made soap, mended clothes, put up preserves from the wild berries she found near the creek. In the evenings, after dinner, they fell into a habit of sitting on the porch while the sun set, watching the land cool and settle into night. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, about small matters, about the work ahead. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, just two people finding peace in each other's company. "I was thinking," Lydia said one evening, "about the bunkhouse. It's empty, just sitting there. If we fixed it up, you could hire hands again. The ranch needs more help than two people can provide." "Can't afford wages," Ethan reminded her. "What about a profit share arrangement? Offer room and board plus a percentage of the cattle sales. Young men looking to learn ranching might take that deal, especially if they're trying to save up to start their own place." Ethan turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "That's actually a good idea. There's a lot of work in fixing up the bunkhouse, though." "I can help with that, too. I'm not afraid of hard work." "No," he said softly. "You're definitely not." They fixed the bunkhouse together over the next month, working in the cooler morning and evening hours. Lydia cleaned while Ethan repaired, replacing broken window panes, fixing the roof where it leaked, reinforcing the bunks. She made mattresses from ticking stuffed with grass and sewn tight, washed the old blankets until they were clean if threadbare. Working side by side, Lydia began to notice things about Ethan Cole that she hadn't before. The way he was always patient in his explanations when she asked questions, the quiet competence of his movements, no wasted motion or energy. The rare smile that transformed his usually somber face into something almost boyish. The way he listened when she talked. Really listened, as if her thoughts and opinions mattered. She also noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention. A look she couldn't quite decipher. Not predatory like Howard Thornton's had been, but something else. Something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. It scared her, that feeling. She'd built walls around herself, learned not to trust, not to hope for more than survival. But those walls were beginning to crack, and she didn't know if that was dangerous or necessary or both. One evening, as they worked together painting the bunkhouse walls, Ethan's hand brushed hers on the paintbrush handle. He pulled back quickly, almost guiltily. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine." But Lydia's voice came out breathless. They continued working in silence, but something had shifted in the air between them, a tension that was both uncomfortable and electric. When they finished for the night and walked back to the house, the distance between them felt simultaneously too great and not nearly enough. That night, lying in her locked room, Lydia stared at the ceiling and acknowledged a truth she'd been avoiding. She was developing feelings for Ethan Cole, real feelings, beyond gratitude or partnership. She was drawn to his quiet strength, his fundamental decency, his dry humor and surprising gentleness. But what terrified her most was the suspicion, growing stronger each day, that he might be feeling the same way about her. And if that was true, then what they had created here, this careful balance of respect and distance, was about to become infinitely more complicated. The next morning, Lydia woke to find a bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen table. Prairie asters and black-eyed Susans arranged in a mason jar. No note, no explanation, but she knew they were from Ethan. She'd seen him ride out early, had heard him return. She touched the petals gently, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Sarah used to say that beauty was as necessary as food. Ethan remembered that, and he'd brought beauty to Lydia, not because she asked, but because he wanted to. When he came in for breakfast, neither of them mentioned the flowers. But Lydia made his favorite meal, eggs scrambled just so, crispy potatoes, fresh biscuits with butter and berry jam. And when their eyes met across the table, something passed between them that didn't need words. The understanding that they were building something here. Something that went beyond their practical arrangement. Something that might be friendship, might be more, might be a second chance at happiness for two people who'd learned not to expect such things. It was terrifying and wonderful and inevitable, like watching a storm gather on the horizon. You couldn't stop it, couldn't change its course. You could only decide whether to run for shelter or stand in the rain. Lydia chose to stand. The storm came 3 weeks later, but not from the sky. Lydia was in town alone, having convinced Ethan that she could handle the weekly supply run by herself. She needed to prove, to herself as much as to him, that she could face Copper Springs without needing protection. The trip had gone smoothly enough. Mr. Hartley had been cordial, several townspeople had nodded politely, and she'd even had a brief, pleasant conversation with Mrs. Chen about a sewing project. She was loading the last of the supplies into the wagon when she heard the voice that still haunted her nightmares. "Well, well, the little thief returns." Howard Thornton stood behind her, impeccably dressed as always, his smile cold and satisfied. Lydia's hands froze on the flour sack she'd been lifting, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Mr. Thornton," she kept her voice level, refused to let him see her fear. "Excuse me, I need to finish loading. I heard you've been living out at the coal place." He stepped closer, too close, invading her space in a way that made her skin crawl. "Playing house with the widower. How enterprising of you. Though I suppose when you've already ruined your reputation, there's no point in propriety. My arrangement with Mr. Cole is honest work for honest accommodation. Not that you'd understand the concept of honesty." The words were out before she could stop them, reckless and dangerous. Thornton's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "Careful, girl. You're in no position to insult your betters." "My betters?" Lydia turned to face him fully, anger overriding caution. "You're a liar and a coward who destroys people's lives because your pride was wounded. That doesn't make you better than anyone." Thornton's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in painfully. "You're going to regret that mouth of yours. I destroyed you once. I can do it again, and this time I'll take Cole down with you." "Let go of me." Lydia tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I'll let go when I'm ready. You need to learn." "The lady asked you to let go." The new voice was cold and hard, and Thornton's head snapped around to find Ethan Cole standing a few feet away. Lydia hadn't heard him approach, but he was there now, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes deadly serious. "This is none of your concern, Cole," Thornton said, but his hand loosened on Lydia's wrist. "When a man puts his hands on a woman against her will, it becomes everyone's concern. Let her go, now." For a moment, Lydia thought Thornton might refuse, might push this into an actual confrontation, but something in Ethan's expression, a quiet promise of consequences, made him release her wrist and step back. "This isn't over," Thornton said, his voice low and venomous. "You've made an enemy today, Cole. Both of you." "I'll survive." Ethan moved to stand beside Lydia, his presence solid and protective without being overbearing. "Now, unless you've got actual business here, I suggest you move along." Thornton's face flushed red with anger and humiliation, but he was smart enough not to escalate further. He turned and stalked away, his expensive boots clicking sharply on the wooden sidewalk. Lydia realized she was shaking. Ethan gently took the flour sack from her trembling hands and loaded it into the wagon himself. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine. I shouldn't have said those things to him. I made it worse." "You told the truth. That's never wrong." Ethan helped her into the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. "But he's right about one thing. He'll come after us now. We need to be prepared for that." The ride home was tense and silent. Lydia's wrist throbbed where Thornton had grabbed her, and she knew there would be bruises. More than the physical pain, though, she felt a deep sense of dread. She'd brought trouble to Ethan's door just as she'd feared from the beginning. "I should leave," she said suddenly as they turned onto the ranch road, "before he does something to hurt you or the ranch. This is my problem, not yours." Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop, so abruptly that Lydia had to grab the seat to steady herself. He turned to face her, his expression fierce. "Don't!" His voice was rough with emotion. "Don't you dare run because some small man makes threats. You belong here now. This is your home as much as mine." "But if he... let him try. I've faced down rustlers, drought, disease, and loss that nearly broke me. Howard Thornton doesn't scare me." He reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering near hers. "Unless you want to leave. Unless you're unhappy here. That's different. But don't leave because you're trying to protect me. I'm a grown man. I make my own choices." Lydia looked at his hand, still suspended between them, and made a choice of her own. She took it, lacing her fingers through his. His palm was calloused and warm, and the contact sent electricity through her entire body. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "I'm just afraid of what might happen." "Then we face it together." Ethan's thumb brushed across her knuckles, the gesture achingly tender. "I'm not letting him hurt you again, Lydia. I promise you that." They sat there for a moment, hands joined, something profound shifting between them. Then Ethan released her hand and clicked to the horses, continuing toward home. But everything had changed in that brief contact, that shared promise. The trouble came faster than either of them expected. 3 days after the confrontation in town, a rider appeared at the ranch with an official-looking document. It was a complaint filed with the territorial marshal, claiming that Ethan was harboring a known thief and demanding her immediate removal from his property. "This is ridiculous," Ethan said, crumpling the paper in his fist. "Thornton has no legal standing to demand anything." "But he has influence," Lydia said, her voice hollow. "Money buys a lot in the territories. If he pushes this, if he gets the marshal involved, then we fight it. We tell the truth. The truth didn't matter before, Ethan. Why would it matter now?" She paced the kitchen, her mind racing. "He's going to keep doing this. He'll make your life hell until you give in and send me away. Every business dealing, every interaction with town, he'll poison it all." Ethan caught her shoulders gently, stopping her frantic movement. "Look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "I have an idea. It's drastic and it's fast and you can say no. But it would solve this problem permanently." "What idea?" He took a deep breath. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and unexpected. Lydia felt her heart stop, then restart with a painful thud. "What?" "Marry me," Ethan repeated, his voice steadier now. "As my wife, you'd have legal protection, social standing. Thornton couldn't touch you, and any claims about impropriety would be silenced immediately." That's insane. We barely know each other. We've been living here for 2 months, and you want to... I know it's fast. I know it's not romantic or traditional, but think about it practically. His hands were still on her shoulders, warm and grounding. "We work well together. We respect each other. We've built something here that functions. A marriage would just be making it official." "A marriage is more than a business arrangement, Ethan. I know that." Something flickered in his eyes, something that made Lydia's breath catch. "But it doesn't have to start as one. People have built real marriages from less. My grandparents had an arranged marriage. They grew to love each other over 50 years together. We'd have a foundation that a lot of couples don't. Mutual respect, shared purpose, genuine affection." "Affection," Lydia repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan's hand slid down her arms, his touch sending shivers through her. "Did you think I brought you flowers just to be polite? Did you think I defended you in town out of pure principle? Lydia, I care about you. More than I planned to, more than I thought I could after Sarah. I'm not asking you to pretend feelings you don't have. But if there's any chance, any possibility that what's growing between us could become something real, then why not protect it? Why not give it a chance to survive?" Lydia's mind was spinning. Marriage. To Ethan Cole, the man who'd offered her shelter when she had nothing, who'd defended her honor, who'd shown her more kindness and respect in 2 months than most men showed in a lifetime. The man whose rare smiles made her heart race, whose quiet strength had become her foundation, whose presence had begun to feel like home. "I don't want you to marry me out of obligation," she said, "or as a solution to a problem. That's not fair to you." "What if I told you I'm not?" Ethan's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "What if I told you that I've been thinking about this for weeks, that having you here has made me feel alive again in a way I thought was gone forever, that I wake up looking forward to breakfast conversations and fall asleep hoping you'll still be here in the morning?" "Ethan, I'm not Sarah. You're not a replacement for her, but you're someone who makes me want to try again, want to build something new, want to believe that happiness is possible more than once in a lifetime." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "So yes, marrying you would solve a practical problem, but it's not just about that. It's about choosing you, choosing us, choosing to fight for what we're building instead of letting someone like Thornton destroy it." Lydia felt tears sliding down her cheeks. This is crazy. Probably. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But you came out to an isolated ranch with a stranger because you had nowhere else to go. You've rebuilt this place from neglect into a home. You stood up to Thornton even knowing the cost. You're not afraid of crazy when it's necessary. What if it doesn't work? What if we make this choice and regret it? Then we deal with it like adults. But Lydia, his thumb brushed away her tears. What if it does work? What if we take this chance and build something real? Isn't that possibility worth the risk? She thought about the life she'd had before coming here. Alone, afraid, constantly looking over her shoulder, never feeling safe or settled. She thought about the past 2 months, the slow building of trust and routine and something that felt like belonging. She thought about Ethan's quiet presence across the breakfast table, his steady support, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. She thought about the flowers in the mason jar, still fresh on the kitchen table. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan's expression transformed, relief and joy and something deeper flooding his features. "You mean it?" "I mean it. It's terrifying and impulsive and probably foolish, but yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest. Lydia could feel his heart pounding, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. For a long moment, they just stood there, wrapped in each other, feeling the enormity of what they'd just decided. "We should do it soon," Ethan said finally, his voice rough. "Before Thornton can cause more trouble, before either of us loses our nerve." "How soon?" "This Saturday. 3 days. We can ride into the next town, Silver Ridge, where we're not known. Find a justice of the peace. Make it legal." He pulled back to look at her. "Unless you want something bigger? A church wedding? Guests? All the traditional elements?" Lydia shook her head. "No, simple is better. Just us, making a choice. That's all I need." They spent the next 3 days in a strange state of heightened awareness and careful distance. They continued their routines, breakfast, work, dinner, evening conversations on the porch, but everything felt different now, weighted with anticipation and promise and fear. Lydia caught herself watching Ethan as he worked, noticing the strength in his hands, the way he moved, the concentration on his face. She found him watching her too, his gaze heated in a way that made her flush and look away, her body responding to possibilities she'd never let herself consider. On Friday evening, the night before their planned trip to Silver Ridge, they sat on the porch as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples. The silence between them was charged, electric. "Are you scared?" Lydia asked finally. "Terrified," Ethan admitted, "but also more certain than I've been about anything in a long time." "What if I'm not?" She hesitated, unsure how to voice her insecurities. "What if I can't be what you need? What if I'm not enough?" Ethan turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Lydia, you've been more than enough since the day you arrived. You brought life back to this place, back to me. Whatever happens after tomorrow, however our marriage unfolds, you need to know that you're already exactly what I need. Strong, capable, resilient, kind. That's not going to change with a piece of paper." "I've never—" She blushed, unable to continue. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. "We'll go at your pace, whatever you're comfortable with. There's no rush, no expectations. This marriage is real, but it doesn't have to be complete until you're ready." The gentleness in his voice, the respect and patience, made Lydia's eyes sting with tears. "Thank you." "Nothing to thank me for. You're not property, Lydia. You're a partner. That means your comfort and consent matter. Always." That night, Lydia lay in her bed unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of what tomorrow would bring. Marriage, a husband, a permanent place in this world instead of the temporary, precarious existence she'd had for so long. She thought about Ethan on the other side of the hallway, wondered if he was awake too, wondered what he was thinking, feeling. Tomorrow, everything would change. The careful distance they'd maintained would shift into something closer, more intimate, whether or not they consummated the marriage right away. Part of her was terrified, but a larger part, the part that had learned to recognize truth when she saw it, was filled with hope. The ride to Silver Ridge the next morning was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Ethan had hitched up the wagon, and Lydia wore her better dress with her mother's cameo at her throat. They looked like what they were, a rancher and a woman of modest means heading to town for business, and yet they were so much more. Silver Ridge was bigger than Copper Springs, a prosperous mining town with 2 main streets and actual brick buildings. Ethan drove directly to the courthouse, a solid structure at the center of town. Inside they found the justice of the peace, an older man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. His name was Judge Morrison, and he asked no questions beyond the basics, their names, their ages, whether they came freely to this marriage. "Do you have witnesses?" he asked. Ethan looked around the small office, then stepped into the hall and returned with 2 courthouse clerks who agreed to stand in. They were young women, sisters maybe, who smiled at Lydia with genuine warmth. "A wedding," one of them whispered. "How lovely." Judge Morrison began the ceremony, and Lydia felt reality crash over her in waves. This was happening. This was real. She was about to marry a man she'd known for 2 months, was about to tie her life to his in the most permanent way possible. "Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Judge Morrison asked. "I do." Ethan's voice was clear and strong, no hesitation. "And do you, Lydia Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Lydia looked at Ethan, at his steady gray eyes, his weather-worn face, the quiet strength in every line of him. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, the betrayal, the humiliation, the desperate acceptance of a stranger's offer. And then she thought about what had grown from that desperate beginning: trust, respect, affection, hope. "I do," she said, and meant it. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Morrison smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Cole." Ethan stepped closer, his hand gentle on Lydia's cheek. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Lydia didn't pull away. She lifted her face to his, and their lips met in a kiss that was soft and careful and full of promise. It was her first kiss, and it felt like coming home. When they separated, both slightly breathless, the clerk witnesses were beaming. Judge Morrison completed the paperwork with efficient movements, and within minutes Lydia was holding a marriage certificate that declared her Mrs. Ethan Cole. The ride back to the ranch felt different. They were husband and wife now, legally bound, their fates intertwined. Ethan reached across the wagon seat and took Lydia's hand, and she let him, their fingers intertwining naturally. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None," she said, surprised to find it was true. "You?" "Not a single one." They arrived home as the sun was setting, painting the ranch in golden light. Ethan helped Lydia down from the wagon, but instead of releasing her immediately, he kept his hands on her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole," he said softly. "It was already home," Lydia replied. "But thank you." That evening they shared dinner at the kitchen table as they had dozens of times before, but everything felt charged with new significance. They were married now. This was their home, their life, their future. After dinner, as they stood to clear the dishes, Ethan caught Lydia's hand. "I meant what I said about going at your pace," he told her. "Tonight, tomorrow, next month, whatever you need. There's no rush." Lydia's heart swelled with affection for this careful, considerate man. "I know, and I appreciate that. But Ethan, I don't want to waste time being afraid. I want to choose courage, choose hope, choose us." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by heat that made Lydia's breath catch. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." Ethan led her upstairs, past the room that had been hers for 2 months, to his room at the end of the hall. It was larger than hers, sparsely furnished but clean. The bed dominated the space, covered with a quilt that Sarah had probably made. Lydia felt a moment of uncertainty. Was it wrong to be here, in the bed he'd shared with his first wife? But Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation. "Sarah would want this," he said quietly, "would want me to live again, to love again. She was generous that way. And this isn't about replacing her. It's about building something new with you." He kissed her then, deeper than the chaste kiss at the courthouse, and Lydia felt herself responding, her body awakening to sensations she'd never allowed herself to feel. When they finally came together, It was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Ethan careful and patient, Lydia nervous but trusting, both of them fumbling toward intimacy with more emotion than expertise. Afterward, lying in Ethan's arms in the darkness, Lydia felt something settle deep in her chest. This was real. This was hers. Not temporary, not precarious, but solid and lasting. "I love you," Ethan whispered against her hair. "I didn't plan to, but I do." Lydia's breath caught. She'd been afraid to name her own feelings, afraid that hope was dangerous. But lying here, safe and cherished, she let herself acknowledge the truth. "I love you too," she whispered back. And outside, the Arizona stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. While inside the ranch house, two broken people built something whole from the fragments of their shattered lives. The news of their marriage reached Copper Springs within 2 days, carried by the same gossip networks that had destroyed Lydia's reputation months before. But this time the whispers carried a different tone: shock, speculation, and grudging respect. A marriage, legal and documented, changed everything. What Howard Thornton had dismissed as impropriety was now a legitimate union, and his campaign against Lydia lost its teeth overnight. Ethan drove into town alone the following Saturday, his marriage certificate folded in his pocket like armor. He walked into the general store where several men were gathered, including Thornton himself, and the conversation died instantly. "Gentlemen," Ethan said, his tone civil but cold, "I wanted to let you know that my wife and I will be doing our regular supply run next week. I trust there won't be any further problems or accusations." Thornton's face had gone an ugly shade of red. "Your wife? How convenient. A rushed marriage to legitimize." "Careful," Ethan interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "That's my wife you're speaking about. And I take exception to anyone who insults her. Strong exception." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Thornton looked around for support, but the other men had suddenly found their boots very interesting. Even in a lawless territory, there were codes, and insulting a man's wife crossed lines that most wouldn't dare. "This isn't over, Cole," Thornton hissed. "Yes," Ethan said flatly. "It is. You've lost. Accept it with whatever grace you can muster and move on. Or keep pushing and find out exactly how unpleasant I can make things for a man who tries to destroy my family." He turned and walked out, leaving Thornton sputtering impotently behind him. When he returned to the ranch and told Lydia what had happened, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for months. "It's really over?" she asked, almost afraid to believe it. "It's over." Ethan pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You're safe now. Protected. Mine." The possessiveness in that last word should have frightened her, but instead it sent warmth flooding through her body. She was his, and he was hers. The thought was still new enough to make her breathless. Their marriage settled into a rhythm over the following weeks, a blend of the comfortable partnership they'd built and the growing intimacy of husband and wife. They still rose before dawn, still worked side by side during the day, but now the nights were different. Now there were stolen kisses in the barn, Ethan's hands on her waist as she cooked dinner, the sweet exhaustion of falling asleep in each other's arms. Lydia had never imagined marriage could be like this. Equal parts friendship and passion, work and pleasure, independence and togetherness. Ethan treated her as a partner in every sense, asking her opinion on ranch decisions, trusting her judgment, sharing both the burdens and the triumphs. When two young ranch hands responded to the profit share arrangement Lydia had suggested, it was she who interviewed them alongside Ethan, her assessment of their character given equal weight. When they decided to expand the cattle herd, she helped plan the finances, calculating costs and potential returns with a head for numbers that impressed even her husband. "Where did you learn bookkeeping?" Ethan asked one evening, watching her update the ranch ledgers with neat, precise entries. "My father was a clerk before he died. He taught me figures, said a woman should understand money whether society approved or not." Lydia made another notation. "My mother thought it was unseemly, but she was grateful for it when I had to manage our household after he passed. Your father was a wise man." "He was." Lydia set down her pen, a wistful expression crossing her face. "He would have liked you, would have approved of this marriage. Even though it happened so fast? Especially because of that. He always said that when you recognize something true, you don't waste time questioning it. You act. She reached across the table and took Ethan's hand. This was true from the beginning. We just needed time to recognize it. The garden flourished under Lydia's continued care, producing abundantly as fall approached. She spent long days harvesting and preserving, making pickles and relishes, canning tomatoes and beans, drying herbs, and storing root vegetables in the cellar. The pantry that had been nearly bare when she arrived was now full, a testament to her hard work and planning. The two ranch hands, Tom and Billy, proved to be good workers. Young men in their early 20s, eager to learn and willing to put in hard hours. With their help, Ethan was able to tackle repairs that had been neglected for years. They fixed fence lines, reinforced the barn, expanded the water systems. The ranch began to look prosperous again, cared for, alive. One evening in late October, as the air turned crisp with the promise of winter, Lydia realized her monthly courses were late. At first she dismissed it. Stress and change could affect such things. But when another week passed, then two, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that made her heart race with equal parts joy and terror. She might be pregnant. The thought consumed her for days before she found the courage to tell Ethan. She chose a quiet evening after the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse when they were alone on the porch watching the stars emerge. "Ethan," she said carefully, "I need to tell you something. I'm not certain yet, but I believe I might be carrying a child." The words hung in the cool air between them. Ethan had gone very still beside her, his face unreadable in the dimness. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You're sure?" "Not completely, but my courses are 3 weeks late and I've been feeling strange in the mornings. Queasy, tired. Yes, I think I'm pregnant." Ethan stood abruptly, walking to the porch railing and gripping it hard. Lydia felt her heart sink. Of course he was afraid. Of course this news would bring back the nightmare of losing Sarah and their baby. How could she have expected anything else? "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know this must be frightening for you. After what happened with Sarah." "Don't," Ethan's voice cracked. "Don't apologize for giving me hope I thought I'd never have again." He turned, and in the starlight she could see tears on his face. "I'm terrified, Lydia. I won't lie about that. The thought of going through that again, of losing you the way I lost Sarah, it's my worst nightmare." "But?" She heard the word he hadn't spoken. "But I also want this so much it hurts. Want to see you grow round with our child. Want to hold a baby that's ours, that's proof we didn't just survive but thrived. Want to build a family with you." He came back to her, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands. "I'm scared, but I'm also happier than I've been in years. Is that wrong?" "No." Lydia cupped his face, her own tears falling now. "No, it's not wrong. It's human. We can be both afraid and joyful. That's allowed." They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead, two people on the edge of something momentous and terrifying and beautiful. A new life growing between them, a future unfolding whether they were ready or not. The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in Silver Ridge a week later. Dr. Brennan was an elderly woman with sharp eyes and gentle hands, one of the few female physicians in the territory. She examined Lydia thoroughly, asked detailed questions, and finally nodded with satisfaction. "You're about 2 months along, I'd estimate. Due sometime in late May or early June." She looked at Ethan, who'd insisted on being present. "Your wife appears healthy and strong, but I understand you lost your first wife in childbirth." "Yes." Ethan's voice was tight. "Then you need to understand something. Every pregnancy is different. Every woman is different. What happened before doesn't dictate what will happen now." Dr. Brennan turned to Lydia. "You take care of yourself, eat well, don't overwork. And you," she fixed Ethan with a stern look, "don't let your fear make you treat her like she's made of glass. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Trust her body to know what to do." "How do we—" Ethan struggled with the words. "How do we keep her safe?" "You can't control everything, but you can make sure she gets proper rest, good nutrition, and stays as calm and stress-free as possible. And when her time comes, you send for me. I've delivered more babies than I can count, and I'm good at what I do. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing the reality of what lay ahead. 7 months until their lives would change irrevocably. 7 months of hope and fear and preparation. "I want to be excited," Lydia said finally. "I want to enjoy this. But I'm afraid that if I let myself be too happy, something will go wrong." "I know exactly what you mean." Ethan reached over and took her hand. "But Dr. Brennan was right. We can't control what happens. All we can do is take care of you, prepare as best we can, and have faith that this time will be different." "Faith," Lydia repeated softly. "I'm not sure I know how to have that anymore." "Then we'll learn together." As the months passed, Lydia's body changed in ways both wondrous and uncomfortable. The morning sickness passed after the first trimester, replaced by a growing roundness that made her existing dresses unwearable. She sewed new ones with expanding waistlines, and Ethan watched her work with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart ache. The ranch hands, Tom and Billy, were respectful and helpful, taking on heavier tasks without being asked. The ranch continued to prosper, the cattle herd growing, the land responding to consistent care and attention. They hired a woman from town, Mrs. Murphy, to come help with the heaviest household work once Lydia's pregnancy became obvious. "You don't need to do this," Lydia protested when Ethan first suggested it. "I can manage." "I know you can, but you don't have to do everything alone anymore. That's what marriage means, sharing burdens." He placed a gentle hand on her swelling belly. "Besides, you're already doing the most important work. Everything else is secondary." Winter came, blanketing the ranch in snow and forcing everyone indoors more often. Lydia spent the dark evenings knitting tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving in rhythms her mother had taught her years ago. Ethan built a cradle from oak, his carpenter's skills rusty but adequate, sanding every surface until it was smooth as silk. "Sarah would have done this better," he said one evening, examining his handiwork critically. "Sarah isn't here." Lydia's tone was gentle but firm. "And this cradle is beautiful because you made it with love for our child. That's what matters." He looked at her, this woman who'd come into his life as a desperate stranger and become his anchor, his partner, his love. "How did I get so lucky?" "Lucky?" Lydia laughed. "You found me being thrown out of a boarding house and accused of theft." "Best day of my life," Ethan said seriously. "Well, second best. Our wedding was first." "Not today? Finding out about the baby?" "That's tied with the wedding." He pulled her close, careful of her protruding belly. "Every day with you is the best day. I'm just greedy enough to want them all." As Lydia's pregnancy progressed into the final months, Ethan's anxiety increased proportionally. He hovered, worried about every twinge and discomfort, drove her to distraction with his overprotectiveness. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Lydia finally snapped one March afternoon when he'd tried to prevent her from climbing the stairs. "Women do this all the time. Stop treating me like I'm about to shatter." "I'm sorry." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking haggard. "I just keep thinking about—" "I know what you're thinking about. But Ethan, you can't spend the next 3 months in constant fear. It's not good for you, and it's not good for me." She took his hands, placing them on her belly where the baby was actively kicking. "Feel that? That's a strong, healthy baby. My body knows what it's doing. You have to trust it. Trust me." "I do trust you. It's fate I don't trust, circumstances. The universe's tendency toward cruelty." "Then trust Dr. Brennan. Trust that we've done everything right, and trust that whatever happens, we'll face it together." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him. "But right now, nothing is wrong. I'm healthy, the baby's active, and we're prepared. So please, my love, try to enjoy this instead of just enduring it in fear." Her words helped, though Ethan's anxiety never fully disappeared. He threw himself into final preparations, making sure the house was ready, that supplies were stocked, that Dr. Brennan knew she might be summoned at any moment. Tom and Billy were given strict instructions about what to do if Lydia went into labor when Ethan was out on the range. "You'd think he was the first man to ever have a baby on the way," Tom said to Lydia one afternoon, his tone affectionate. "Never seen a man so wound up." "He lost his first wife this way," Lydia explained quietly. "It's not just nervousness, it's trauma." "Makes sense then. But for what it's worth, ma'am, you look strong as an ox. Begging your pardon for the comparison, but it's meant as a compliment." Lydia laughed despite herself. "I'll take it as one. May arrived with unseasonable heat, and Lydia felt increasingly uncomfortable as her due date approached. She was huge now, her belly so distended she could barely see her feet. Sleep was difficult, her back ached constantly, and the baby seemed to have decided that nighttime was perfect for acrobatics. "I'm ready for this to be over," she told Ethan one sweltering evening, fanning herself on the porch. "Just a few more weeks at most." "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one carrying an entire person around in your midsection." Ethan grinned, then quickly hid it when she glared at him. "Sorry, you're beautiful when you're cranky." "I'm enormous and miserable and sweating like a horse." "Beautiful," he repeated firmly, glowing with life. "Perfect." Despite her discomfort, Lydia felt her irritation melt. "You're impossible." "You married me anyway." "Moment of weakness." "Best moment of your life," he countered, echoing their familiar banter. "Second best," Lydia admitted. "The best will be when this baby finally decides to arrive." That moment came sooner than expected. On a Tuesday morning in late May, Lydia woke to cramping pain that felt different from the false labor she'd experienced over the past weeks. She lay still for a moment, timing the contractions, before shaking Ethan awake. "It's time," she said simply. Ethan bolted upright, his face going pale. "Are you sure?" "The contractions are regular and getting stronger." "Yes, I'm sure." Another pain gripped her, and she breathed through it. "Send Tom for Dr. Brennan, right now." The next hours blurred together in a haze of pain and effort and fear. Dr. Brennan arrived with reassuring competence, examining Lydia and declaring everything was progressing normally. But normal still hurt more than anything Lydia had ever experienced. Waves of agony that built and crested and receded, only to build again. Ethan stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even as his own fear was written clearly on his face. Lydia could see him reliving his nightmare with every contraction, could feel his hand trembling in hers. "I'm all right," she gasped between pains. "I'm strong. I can do this." "I know you can." But his voice shook. The labor intensified as day turned to evening, and Lydia's strength began to wane. Dr. Brennan remained calm but watchful, monitoring everything with professional detachment that both reassured and frightened. "The baby's positioned well," she said during one of Lydia's brief respites. "You're doing everything right. Just keep breathing, keep pushing when I tell you. We're almost there." Almost there. The words became a mantra in Lydia's mind as the pain consumed her completely. Almost there. Almost done. Almost safe. And then, as the sun was setting outside the bedroom window, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Dr. Brennan said the words Lydia had been desperate to hear. "One more push. Give me one more good push, and we'll have this baby." Lydia bore down with everything she had left, felt something shift and release, and then heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's first cry, indignant and loud and wonderfully alive. "It's a boy," Dr. Brennan announced, placing the squalling infant on Lydia's chest. "A healthy, perfect boy." Lydia looked down at her son, red-faced and wrinkled and covered in vernix, but absolutely perfect, and felt love crash over her with the force of a physical blow. This was her child, hers and Ethan's, proof that beauty could come from darkness, that hope could triumph over fear. "Ethan," she whispered, looking up at her husband. Ethan was staring at the baby with an expression of wonder and terror and overwhelming love. His face was wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "He's perfect," Ethan breathed. "He's absolutely perfect." "Would you like to cut the cord, Mr. Cole?" Dr. Brennan asked. With shaking hands, Ethan performed the task, severing the physical connection between mother and child. Dr. Brennan took the baby briefly to clean him and check him over, then wrapped him in a soft blanket and handed him to Ethan. The sight of her strong, weathered husband holding their tiny son with such reverent care made Lydia's eyes fill with fresh tears. Ethan looked transported, transformed, every line of his face softened by wonder. "He's real," Ethan said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "He's here, and he's healthy, and he's real." "Very real," Dr. Brennan said with satisfaction. "And your wife did beautifully. Everything went exactly as it should. You have a fine son and a strong wife, Mr. Cole." Congratulations. After Dr. Brennan had finished her post-delivery care and declared both mother and baby in excellent health, she left them alone with instructions to send for her if anything seemed amiss. Ethan sat beside Lydia on the bed, their son cradled between them, and for a long time they simply stared at the miracle they'd created. "What should we name him?" Lydia asked softly. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking, James, after your father, James Cole. What do you think?" Lydia felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You'd do that? Name him after my father?" "He helped make you who you are, and who you are saved my life in every way that matters. Besides," he touched the baby's tiny hand with one calloused finger, "it's a good, strong name." "James?" Lydia repeated, testing it. "James Cole, yes. It's perfect." Their son chose that moment to yawn, a tiny sound that was somehow both comical and endearing. Then his eyes opened, dark blue like all newborns, and seemed to look directly at his parents with solemn intensity. "Hello, James," Lydia whispered. "Welcome to your life." The first weeks with James were both harder and more wonderful than anything Lydia had imagined. The baby was healthy and strong, but he had powerful lungs and used them frequently, especially in the dark hours before dawn. Lydia walked the floor with him countless times, singing lullabies her mother had sung to her, swaying in the moonlight that streamed through the windows. Ethan was a revelation as a father. The fear that had consumed him during the pregnancy transformed into fierce protectiveness and tender devotion. He changed diapers without complaint, walked James when Lydia was too exhausted, and sat for hours simply watching his son sleep with an expression of wonder that never quite faded. "I can't believe he's real," Ethan said one night, holding James against his chest while the baby dozed. "That he's ours, that we get to keep him." "We do," Lydia confirmed softly, curled beside them in bed. "He's ours and he's healthy, and we're a family." The word still felt new and precious. Family. She'd lost hers so long ago and had never quite believed she'd have another. But here it was. A husband who loved her, a son who depended on her, a home that was truly theirs. As spring turned to summer, life on the ranch developed a new rhythm. The ranch hands, Tom and Billy, proved invaluable, managing much of the daily work while Ethan focused on being present for his wife and son. Mrs. Murphy came more frequently, helping with household tasks and cooing over baby James with the expertise of a woman who'd raised 6 children of her own. "He's got his father's eyes," she declared one afternoon, bouncing James on her hip while Lydia prepared lunch. "Same serious look, like he's puzzling out the mysteries of the universe." "He's 3 months old," Lydia laughed. "I don't think he's puzzling out much beyond when his next meal's coming." "Don't you believe it? Babies see more than we give them credit for." Mrs. Murphy kissed James's downy head. "This one's going to be smart. I can tell." The ranch continued to prosper under their combined efforts. The profit-sharing arrangement with Tom and Billy was working well, and they'd been able to expand the cattle operation significantly. Lydia's careful management of finances meant they were not only solvent, but actually saving money for the first time in years. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch with James asleep in his cradle beside them, Ethan brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. "About what we're building here." "And?" Lydia prompted. "This ranch could be something really significant. With the right investments, the right expansion, we could build something that lasts, something to leave to James and any other children we might have." Lydia felt her heart skip. "Other children?" "If you want them, if you're willing." Ethan reached for her hand. "I know the birth was hard, and I understand if once is enough. But watching you with James, seeing you as a mother, I can't help but hope for more. A house full of children. A legacy." "I'd like that," Lydia said softly. "Not right away. I'm not ready yet. But yes, eventually, I'd like James to have siblings." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The land stretched before them, the Triple Creek Ranch that had been a neglected, struggling operation when Lydia first arrived and was now thriving, full of potential. "There's something else," Ethan said. "I want to add your name to the deed. Make you a legal co-owner of this ranch. It's not just mine anymore. It's ours. That should be official." Lydia turned to stare at him. "Ethan, you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to. You've put as much work into this place as I have, made as many sacrifices, had as much vision for what it could become. You deserve to own it equally." He squeezed her hand. "Besides, if something happened to me, I want to know you and James would be protected, that no one could take this from you." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Lydia said fiercely. "Probably not. But life is uncertain. We both know that better than most." His expression was serious. "Please, let me do this. Let me give you the security you've never had." So they made the trip to Silver Ridge the following week, James bundled in a basket between them, and filed the paperwork that made Lydia Hale Cole the legal co-owner of the Triple Creek Ranch. Walking out of the courthouse with that document felt almost as momentous as their marriage certificate had. "How does it feel to be a landowner?" Ethan asked as they drove home. "Terrifying," Lydia admitted, "and wonderful, and like I finally have something no one can take away." "No one will ever take anything from you again," Ethan promised. "Not while I'm breathing." As summer progressed into fall, James grew from a newborn into a baby with personality, quick to smile, especially at his father, and already showing signs of the stubborn determination that characterized both his parents. Lydia chronicled his developments in a journal, wanting to remember every moment of this precious time. The ranch thrived. They hired another hand, a Mexican man named Carlos, who had years of experience with cattle and taught them techniques they'd never considered. The garden produced abundantly again, and Lydia spent long days preserving food for winter, James in a basket nearby where she could watch him while she worked. It was Carlos who first noticed the strangers watching the ranch. He mentioned it to Ethan one October afternoon, his expression troubled. "I've seen the same two men on the eastern ridge 3 times this week," he said. "They're watching the herd, the house. Could be rustlers, could be something else. But it's not casual." Ethan's expression hardened. "Show me where." That evening, he took his rifle and rode out to investigate. He returned after dark, his face grim. "It's Thornton's men," he told Lydia, who'd been pacing the kitchen in worry. "I recognized one of them from town. They didn't try to hide once I confronted them, said they were just surveying the area." "What does that mean?" Lydia felt cold fear creeping up her spine. "I thought we were done with him. The marriage, the baby. I thought he'd given up." "So did I." Ethan set his rifle aside and pulled her close. "But apparently not. I'll go into town tomorrow, talk to the marshal, make it official that they're trespassing. Whatever Thornton's planning, we'll deal with it." But the marshal, when Ethan spoke to him the next day, was less helpful than hoped. Thornton had recently made a substantial donation to the town, funding a new schoolhouse, and his influence had grown accordingly. The marshal promised to look into it, but made no commitments beyond that. "He's going to come at us sideways," Ethan told Lydia that night. "Can't attack you directly anymore, so he'll go after the ranch, the business, anything he can touch. Then we protect everything we can and prepare for whatever comes." Lydia's voice was steady, despite her fear. "We've survived worse. We'll survive this." The attack, when it came, was more insidious than either of them expected. Rumors began circulating in town, whispers that the Triple Creek cattle were diseased, that buying beef from the Coles was dangerous. Orders that had been promised were mysteriously canceled. Merchants who'd been friendly became suddenly cool. "It's Thornton," Tom reported after a trip to town for supplies. "He's spreading lies, pressuring people to boycott anything connected to this ranch. Says he's protecting the community from—" He hesitated. "From what?" Ethan demanded. "From folks of questionable character who can't be trusted." Tom's face was red with anger. "It's horseshit, begging your pardon, ma'am. Everyone knows it. But he's got money and influence, and people are scared to cross him." The financial impact was immediate and severe. Without buyers for their cattle, their income dried up. The mortgage payment on the expanded herd was coming due, and they didn't have the funds to cover it. Lydia spent a sleepless night going over the books, trying to find a solution. In the morning, she presented her findings to Ethan with grim determination. "We have 3 options," she said. "We can sell the cattle at a loss to buyers outside the territory, which would barely cover the mortgage but leave us with nothing for winter. We can default on the loan and lose the herd entirely. Or we can fight back." "Fight how?" Ethan asked. We go over Thornton's head. Silver Ridge is bigger than Copper Springs, less under his influence. We find buyers there, establish contracts, bypass the local market entirely. It means more travel, more work, but it would free us from dependence on people he controls. That's risky. If we can't find buyers, we will. Lydia's confidence was absolute. Our cattle are healthy, our prices are fair, and people in Silver Ridge don't care about Howard Thornton's vendettas. They care about good beef at good prices. We can offer that. It was Carlos who made the plan possible. He had family in Silver Ridge, including a brother-in-law who owned a butcher shop and had connections throughout the region. Within 2 weeks, they'd secured contracts that not only matched their previous sales, but exceeded them. When Thornton learned that his boycott had failed, that the Coles were not only surviving but prospering, his fury was apparently spectacular. The marshal came to the ranch personally to warn them. Thornton's making noise about taking legal action, Marshal Davies said uncomfortably. Claims you've defamed his character, damaged his business reputation. It's nonsense, but he's got lawyers and money. Let him try. Ethan's voice was cold. We've documented everything. His harassment, his false accusations, his attempts to destroy our business. If he wants to make this a legal battle, we'll bury him in truth. I'm just saying, be careful. Man like that, when he's cornered, he gets dangerous. The warning proved prophetic. A week later, fire broke out in the northern pasture, deliberately set to spread toward the ranch buildings. Only Carlos's quick action and the presence of the 3 creeks that gave the ranch its name prevented catastrophe. They managed to contain the fire, but 10 acres of prime grazing land were destroyed. This has to stop, Lydia said, staring at the blackened earth the next morning. James was on her hip, and she held him tighter than necessary. He's going to keep escalating until someone gets hurt. I know. Ethan's jaw was tight. I'm going to end this, today. He rode into Copper Springs that afternoon, but he didn't go to confront Thornton. Instead, he went to the bank, to the mayor's office, to the newly built schoolhouse that Thornton had funded, and he told the truth. All of it. About the harassment, the false accusations, the attempts to destroy their business, and now the arson that could have killed people. Howard Thornton is a dangerous man, Ethan told the assembled town council. He's trying to destroy my family because my wife refused his inappropriate advances over a year ago. Everything that's happened since stems from that, from his wounded pride and his need for revenge. And it won't stop unless you, as community leaders, make it stop. These are serious accusations, the mayor said carefully, with serious evidence to back them up. My wife isn't the only woman he's harassed. I've spoken to 3 others in town who've had similar experiences but were too afraid to speak up. I have documentation of the business interference, witness testimony about the fire. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to investigate and see the truth for yourselves. The investigation, once begun, uncovered more than even Ethan had known. Thornton had been systematically harassing women throughout the territory, using his money and influence to silence them. He'd destroyed multiple businesses that competed with his interests. He'd bribed officials and manipulated contracts. When the territorial marshal finally arrested Howard Thornton on charges of arson, fraud, and criminal harassment, the whole territory seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. Thornton was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison and ordered to pay substantial restitution to his victims. The day the verdict came down, Lydia stood on the porch of the Triple Creek Ranch, watching the sun set over land that was truly, finally, safely theirs. James was asleep inside, and Ethan stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "It's really over." "It's over," Ethan confirmed. "He can't hurt us anymore. Can't hurt anyone anymore. I keep waiting to feel triumphant, but mostly I just feel tired." "That's because you're a decent person. Revenge doesn't actually feel as good as people think it will." He kissed her temple. "But justice. Justice feels right." The years that followed were marked by steady growth and deepening contentment. James grew from a baby into a toddler, then a young boy who followed his father everywhere, asking endless questions and showing early signs of inheriting Ethan's love for the land. Lydia gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah, after Ethan's first wife, and another son they named Thomas, after Lydia's mother's father. The Triple Creek Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the territory. They built a larger house, though they kept the original structure as a testament to where they'd started. The bunkhouse that Lydia and Ethan had repaired together now housed 6 hands, all working the profit share arrangement that had proven so successful. Lydia's garden expanded into a full market operation, selling produce throughout the region. She taught Sarah to garden the way her own mother had taught her, passing down knowledge and tradition across generations. The pantry that had once been nearly bare now overflowed with abundance, shelves lined with preserved foods, bins of root vegetables, stores of grain and flour. Tom and Billy eventually left to start their own ranch, using the stake they'd built up through their profit sharing. They remained close friends with the Coles, visiting regularly and sending their own children to play with James and Sarah and Thomas. Carlos became foreman, a role he held with quiet competence and unwavering loyalty. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Lydia back to Silver Ridge, to the courthouse where they'd spoken their vows in front of strangers with no guarantee of anything beyond legal protection. "A lot has changed since we stood here," he said, looking up at the building. "Everything has changed," Lydia agreed. "We were practically strangers, desperate people making a desperate choice. Best choice I ever made." "Second best," Lydia corrected, smiling. "The best was offering me that spare room in the first place." "No," Ethan said seriously. "The offer was self-interest. I needed help. But choosing to love you, choosing to build a life with you instead of just an arrangement, that was the best choice. That changed everything." They renewed their vows that day, this time with their children present, this time surrounded by friends and community members who'd come to witness and celebrate. It wasn't the quick, practical ceremony of their first marriage. It was a declaration of love tested by time and hardship and proven true. Years continued to pass. James grew into a young man who took to ranching like he'd been born to it, showing the same quiet competence and steady judgment as his father. Sarah developed her mother's head for numbers and business, eventually taking over the financial management of the ranch. Thomas proved to have a gift for working with horses, building a breeding program that became renowned throughout the territory. Lydia and Ethan aged together, their faces showing the marks of sun and wind and time, but their love only deepening with each passing year. They faced hardships, droughts and harsh winters, the loss of loved ones, the challenges of raising children in an unforgiving land, but they faced them together, their partnership the foundation on which everything else was built. On a late afternoon in their 30th year of marriage, Lydia sat on the porch of the house they'd built together, watching her grandchildren play in the yard. James had married a neighboring rancher's daughter and had 3 children of his own. Sarah had wed a banker from Silver Ridge and had 2 sons. Thomas was courting a schoolteacher, and the wedding was planned for spring. Ethan came out and settled into the chair beside her, moving a bit more slowly than he once had, but still strong, still steady. "You look thoughtful," he observed. "I was thinking about the day we met, the day I was thrown out of that boarding house and had nowhere to go. If someone had told me then what my life would become, this ranch, this family, this love, I never would have believed it." "You might not have believed it, but you chose it anyway. You were brave enough to take the chance." "We both were." Lydia reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 30 years of practice. 2 broken people who built something whole. "Not broken," Ethan corrected gently. "Wounded. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed, but wounded things can heal, especially when they find the right conditions." And what were our right conditions? Each other. Respect. Partnership. Love that grew from friendship instead of passion that burned out. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "And stubbornness. Let's not forget the stubbornness." Lydia laughed, the sound carrying across the ranch land that had become her home, her sanctuary, her legacy. In the distance, she could see the mountains painted purple by the setting sun, the same view she'd had from her small room that first night when she'd arrived with nothing but a worn carpet bag and desperate hope. That room was still there, though it was used for storage now. Sometimes Lydia went in and stood by the window, remembering the woman she'd been, frightened. Uncertain of everything except that she wouldn't give up. She liked to think that young woman would be proud of who she'd become, of what she'd built. Do you have any regrets? She asked Ethan suddenly. He was quiet for a moment, considering seriously as he always did. About us? Not one. About Sarah's death? About the years of loneliness before you came? About the hardships we've faced? Yes, I regret those. But they brought me to you, so I can't regret them too deeply. He turned to look at her. You? I regret the pain that brought us together. I regret Howard Thornton and what he tried to do. I regret that I ever had to feel unsafe or unwanted or afraid. She squeezed his hand. But I don't regret where those experiences led me. I don't regret this life. I don't regret you. Their grandson, James's eldest boy named Ethan, after his grandfather, ran up to the porch, breathless and excited. Grandma, Grandpa, come see. Pa says the new foal is born, and it's the prettiest thing you ever saw. We're coming, Lydia said, rising with only a slight stiffness in her joints. They walked together toward the barn, their hands still linked, their steps matched by long practice. The ranch bustled with life around them. Children playing, hands working, animals grazing, gardens growing. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, everything they'd loved into existence. That night, lying in bed with the windows open to the cool spring air, Lydia thought about legacy. Not just the land or the business or the material wealth they'd accumulated, though those were significant, but the real legacy, the family they'd created, the love they'd demonstrated, the example they'd set of partnership and perseverance. James and his wife had the same kind of relationship Lydia and Ethan had built. Equal partners, mutual respect, shared purpose. Sarah and her husband had weathered hardship together and emerged stronger. Thomas was choosing a woman not for beauty or fortune, but for character and compatibility. We did it right, she whispered into the darkness. Beside her, Ethan stirred. Did what right? Everything. The marriage, the children, the ranch. We took something that started from desperation and trauma and fear, and we made it into something beautiful. We broke the cycle. Our children don't carry our wounds, they carry our strength. Our grandchildren too, Ethan added. They'll never know what it's like to feel unsafe or unwanted. They'll grow up knowing they're loved, that they belong, that they have a place in this world that no one can take from them. It was, Lydia thought, the greatest achievement of their lives. Greater than the successful ranch, greater than the financial security, greater even than the love they'd found together. They'd created safety for the next generation. They'd given their children and grandchildren the foundation they themselves had never had. Years later, when Lydia was an old woman with silver hair and Ethan's hands had become gnarled with arthritis, they still sat on that porch every evening, watching the sun set over the land they'd built together. Their children were grown with children of their own. The Triple Creek Ranch spanned thousands of acres and employed dozens of people. The name Cole was respected throughout the territory, synonymous with fairness and quality and integrity. But the ranch was never just about land or cattle or profit. It was about what that spare room had represented on the day Ethan first offered it. A chance when chances seemed impossible, safety when the world felt dangerous, hope when despair seemed inevitable. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? Lydia asked one evening, when you offered me the room. I said a lot of things that day. Which part? You said that trust wasn't something you know, it's something you build or you don't. That actions matter more than words. I remember. Ethan smiled. I was terrified you'd say no. I was terrified to say yes. But you were right. We built trust, one day at a time, one choice at a time, and from that trust came everything else. No regrets? It had become their question over the years, asked and answered countless times. Not one, Lydia replied, as she always did. You? Not a single one. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant golds and deep purples, Lydia leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder and felt the profound contentment of a life well lived. She'd started with nothing, no home, no safety, no hope. She'd been cast out, accused, humiliated, and afraid. But a lonely cowboy had seen her fall and offered his spare room and his heart. And from that simple kindness, they'd built an empire of love that would last for generations. The ranch would continue after they were gone. Their children would carry it forward, and their children's children after that. The land would endure, the legacy would persist. But more than that, the truth they'd proven together would echo through time, that kindness offered at the right moment could change everything, that love could grow in the most unlikely places, that two wounded people could find healing in each other's arms. In the end, it wasn't about the spare room or the ranch or the wealth they'd accumulated. It was about the choice they'd made to see each other's worth when the world saw nothing. It was about building trust from nothing, family from loneliness, and love from desperation. It was about taking the broken pieces of their lives and creating something whole and beautiful and lasting. And as the stars emerged in the darkening sky above the Triple Creek Ranch, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that their story, imperfect and hard-won and gloriously real, was exactly what it was meant to be. A testament to courage, a celebration of love, and proof that the best things in life often come from the moments when we're brave enough to accept help, wise enough to offer it, and strong enough to build something lasting from the ashes of what was lost. Their legacy wasn't just land or cattle or money, it was hope. And hope, they'd learned together, was the most valuable inheritance of all.